Hey everyone, welcome to another card spotlight video. It seems like the last one I did, spotlighting the Zendikar Rising pathway lands. So I did a video on that, talking about the pathway lands and how I feel they didn't really fit that well into more eternal formats. And now in Kaldheim we have the dual snow lands, and there was a lot of talk about these. The artwork is beautiful. It's really great that they're snow lands, and they also have basic land types, so mountains, plains, so on and so forth. So you can fetch for them in many different ways. A lot of people have been asking, are these actually modern viable? Obviously, when you get to Legacy and Vintage, these are obviously not viable. Just because, Legacy and Vintage have dual lands, and dual lands are just always going to be the best lands in Magic. But in Modern, where things are slightly more affordable and the player base is much larger and a lot more active, it's definitely a good question. So I wanted to do a quick video and give you my thoughts on it and what, how I think these cards are going to play into the format without actually seeing any decks pop up just yet. So let's take a look at them. Very, very straightforward. They are Snowland. Well, let's look at Alpine Meadow here. It's a mountain plains, and when it enters the battlefield, it enters the battlefield tapped. So essentially, assuming you don't have some other card that untaps your permanents when it enters the battlefield, it's going to be coming in tapped, and you're not going to be able to use it no matter what turn it is, whether it's turn 1 or whether it's turn 10. It will always come into the battlefield tapped. So late game, that's less of an issue. My main concerns are really early game, and you've probably heard me talk about this with Mystic Sanctuary in a lot of my deck techs and why I dislike cards like that, even though, they do provide value when you can meet all of their criteria. In this case, you can't even meet any criteria. These cards are just always going to enter the battlefield tapped. And that's really a problem, because on turn 1, when it's, let's just say you are starting the match, so you go first, and you don't have any other lands but these dual snow lands. Well, guess what? Your turn 1 play is not going to happen. If you have an Arbor Elf, a Goblin Guide, Inquisition Kozilek, Serum Visions, or any number of turn 1 plays that are very common in Modern, it's not going to happen. You're going to have nothing, and you won't even be able to keep mana up to potentially counter your opponent's first turn play. So if they play a Mana Dork, or they try and, Inquisition Kozilek you, and you have a counter spell or something, you're not going to be able to do it. What's worse is if you're going second, meaning your opponent has a turn on you, you won't be able to do anything turn 1, and you won't be able to do anything on their turn 2. So most likely, right? Unless you're playing, I guess, Force of Negation or something else, but most of the time, you won't be able to do anything for their first or second turn. So you're just giving your opponent a real big leg up there by playing these lands. And now, of course, not every land in your deck is going to be a snow dual land. That's fair. But there will be a number of games where you have an opening hand of 7 cards and it would otherwise be keepable. But because you have a snow dual land that's going to come into battlefield tapped, you might have to throw that hand away. And that's really a big problem. So what does that mean? That means eventually you're going to be forced to play less of these in your deck, or play none of them. And, depending on the type of deck you're trying to build, that, might negate the whole point of playing these in the first place. So that's really my main issue with these snowlands. Even though they're really, really cool, I want to play with them. I definitely want to play with them. I definitely want to brew a deck using them and, use their snow type to boost other cards. But it's just very difficult. So you might be playing 1 or 2 of in that case, in which case they're just going to be another land in your, pool of lands that you have available in your deck, and you're going to have to weigh the pros and cons of potentially having some weird and awkward starting hands. And now that's just a starting hand, but you might not start with one of these dual lands in your opening hand, which is fine, but you might draw into one. So maybe your second or third land draw might be a land that you can't use. And that's really a problem, again, because you're essentially out-tempoing yourself, or you're allowing your opponent to out-tempo you simply by not being able to play a 3-drop, for example, on turn 3. or playing a 2-drop on turn 2. So all of these really have to come into play when you're building your deck and you're sculpting your mana base. And like I said, I'm assuming you're not going to be playing all 10 of these or playing full play sets of these in your mana base. It still means that some number of your games are going to start off on mulligans or just going to be really weird or slow in your opening hand. So let's take a quick look at the other lands. Apart from the first one in this slide, I just included it there because it's interesting. But apart from that one, all these other lands are currently played in Modern. And let's just quickly compare them to the snow lands. So before we get to that, though, I just want to show, I wanted to remind you guys that in Cold Snap, there were 5 snow lands, dual lands printed. I completely forgot until I started researching this video a bit. But yeah, they exist. You only have 5, so you don't have the full 10. So you don't have every color combination, but they exist. Of course, they're much worse because they don't even have a basic land type, so you can't fetch for them, and they still come into the battlefield tapped, so they're definitely not an option. This is why you probably never even heard of them before now. But the artwork is beautiful. I recommend you check them out. The artwork, I picked the best one, at least the one that I enjoy the most. The artwork is just beautiful, just as beautiful as the new ones, maybe even a bit more so. But yeah, so snow dual lands existed before Kaldheim. Just make a note of that. But of course, these new Kaldheim snow lands are much better. So anyway, let's get past that. No one plays that in Modern. The main card you have to look at, the dual land of Modern, are the Shocks. They're essentially the best dual lands you have available to you in Modern. End of story. You can make arguments for the other cards that you're seeing on the screen here, but they're really the best. And they're the best because you can fetch for them, and they don't have to come into the battlefield tapped if you don't want to. You can pay 2 life, and they come into the battlefield untapped, and you can use them immediately. And that's really important. Your life total, your life in general, is just another resource, just like your mana, just like your graveyard, just like your library. These are all different resources that you use to win the game. It's not just something like a countdown every time your opponent attacks you and you can't block. It's something that goes down. When your opponent's attacking you, they're stealing a resource away from you by taking away some of your life. So your life total is a resource like anything else. So using 2 of it to be able to play essentially any card in your deck because you have access to all the mana that you need is super powerful, which is why Shocks basically always retain their value, even though they've been reprinted quite a few times now. They're still $10, $15, $20+ for most of them in their non-foil format, just because, you know, they're super needed everywhere in many formats. But let's just talk about Modern here. So nothing is going to replace these, so why would you? The only reason you would, and we'll get to that in the next, into the next screen when I get past these lands, is because you're playing some deck that heavily relies on snow lands. But as of right now, there's nothing that I see in the Modern card pool that would justify a deck like that. So, realistically speaking, I mean, I've picked up a playset of these just because they're super cheap. Super cheap because they're common. So I recommend, if you have maybe $20, you could probably pick up a full playset of all 10 of them just to have. But for the time being, nothing's going to be replacing your Water Your Graves or your Temple Gardens or your Blood Crypts. Just nothing. Apart from the Shock lands, though, let's look at the other conditional lands that we have available to us. So Clifftop Retreat being one of the 10 essentially available that are like this, where they essentially check to see if you have one of 2 other basic land types in play for them to come into the battlefield untapped. So in case of Clifftop Retreat, you need to have a mountain or a plains. If you do, well, then Clifftop Retreat enters the battlefield untapped, which is great because it's a dual land, and it's basically going to be untapped if it's your second land plus, your second land drop or more. So, really good options here, but you can't fetch for them. And that's unfortunate, but not the end of the world because usually you play them alongside Shock lands. Then you have your Spire Bluff Canals and all the other lands that essentially are like Spire Bluff Canal. I believe you have all 10 color combinations available to you. And these come into battlefield untapped unless you control 2 or, they come into the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands. So up to 3 land drops, these are coming to battlefield untapped. Very powerful. They're great, and they see quite a bit of play. But of course, after turn 3, so turn 4 and on, these are always going to be coming battlefield tapped, which could be a problem. But usually the early game is the most important, so not the end of the world. I would definitely put these over the Clifftop Retreat type lands. Then you have the Horizon Lance, or in this case Horizon Canopy, very similar to Pain Lance here. You pay 1 life and you add 1 of 2 colors to your mana pool, or you can pay 1, sacrifice it, and draw a card. Very cool. These also see play in Modern and in many other formats. It's very nice to be able to, let's say, sacrifice this land when you've overdrawn lands, you've flooded, and you don't mind getting rid of 1 to draw a card and potentially draw an answer or win condition. So these are pretty cool lands to consider as well. And again, I would definitely put these over snow lands almost certainly. And last but not least, you have your actual Pain lands, where they generate colorless mana, which is very relevant in many decks, or they generate 1 of 2 colors, and of course it deals 1 damage to you. So very similar to the Horizon lands, except you can't sack him to cantrip, you can't sack him to draw a card. So these are the majority of the types of dual lands that you see in Modern, and essentially all of them are going to be better options than your new snow dual lands. So that being said, I think this is probably very obvious to most of you. That being said, how do I want to use these in a deck? And these are just some of the cards that I've been thinking about that either have seen play already in Modern, or may see play now in Modern. We'll see. So Icefang Coatl, of course, it benefits from having a bunch of snow permanents, because once you have enough, it gets Death Touch, which is very relevant because it becomes removal on a stick for creatures that you couldn't otherwise get rid of. So if you're playing Temur, for example, Temur doesn't have the best removal for large creatures. Icefang Coatl can be a nice stopgap for that because it has Death Touch, so they'll die anyway. Plus, you get the draw off of it. It has Flash, it has Flying. Icefang Coatl is really great when Astrolabe, Arkham's Astrolabe was legal for a short period of time. Icefang Coatl just was a big important creature in Modern. So definitely, if I'm building a snow deck, this is going to be a 4 of almost certainly. Now switching to a new card that's coming in, Frostbite. Now Frostbite really misses out because you can't target your opponent, and that's a problem. But you know what? The next card we're going to look at, Skred, has seen plenty of play in Modern, and it only targets creatures. You can't even target planeswalkers, and it still saw plenty of play. So I think Frostbite here will probably see some play, especially if snow decks start to pick up steam again. Basically, if you control 3 or more snow permanents, it deals 3 damage instead. So it's a lightning bolt that doesn't hit players, but it hits essentially anything else. It'll hit creatures, or it'll hit planeswalkers, which is very relevant. Very, very relevant. So I think Frostbite probably won't be a 4 of in decks, but some number of, in particular if you're really committing on snow. So you have plenty of snow permanents, then Frostbite is probably going to be a very consistent 3 damage to creature or planeswalker. Now going back to Skred, which I think, for all intents and purposes is going to be more important than Frostbite here. Yes, it only targets creatures, but if you're playing a deck that's playing 10, 15, 20 main deck snow permanents, Skred's just going to be brutal. You're going to be able to remove almost any creature in Modern that doesn't have Indestructible. So Skred's going to be really important. At the end of the day, I'll probably be mixing between Frostbite and Skred. Really depends. If you're playing red, you're always going to be playing Lightning Bolt, and I don't think Lightning Bolt is going to be supplanted by any of these 2 cards. But they will see play alongside Lightning Bolt in some number in Modern, but I don't think just yet. Another card that I shared on my Twitter feed a couple of days ago, Graven Lore. I don't know. I feel like this is one of those cards that are often they're trap cards. They're trap cards in the sense that they look cool, they look powerful, they look like they can be abused. But at the end of the day, it just ends up being kind of flat in a format like Modern. But in theory, it could be a 5-mana Scry 5 and then draw 3 cards. That's pretty damn good. Scrying 5, meaning you could, essentially put up to the 5 cards from the top of your library to the bottom, because there are 5 cards you don't need, and then drawing 3 cards. That's a lot of cards to go through your deck. And this is 5 mana, so you will be casting this on maybe turn 4 or turn 5, depending on if you have ramp in your deck. So you're going through a large percentage of your deck to find whatever answer you need, and up to 3 of them. So I think Graven Lore is really cool. downside is the fact that it is 5 mana. So if I'm going to be playing Graven Lore, I'll probably be playing it alongside green in either a 2-color or 3-color deck so that I could ramp into it, in which case that would make a bit more sense. But, you know, it's also not something you're going to be playing 4 of. It seems to be too much. But it's definitely a card I have my eye on as more and more snow permanents enter the fold of Modern that aren't going to be banned, like Astrolabe. Next is Sculptor of Winter, which kind of reminds me of Arbor Elf. Now, obviously, Sculptor of Winter is slightly worse because it's 2 mana. But what's cool about it is you get to untap target snow land. So that's pretty cool. Arbor Elf targets forests. Sculptor of Winter targets any snow land. So it definitely targets more lands than Arbor Elf, but it's 2 mana. And that's just a lot. It's a 2/2. Arbor Elf is a 1/1. That's relevant in some situations, not all. What's really here is the 2 mana that's kind of an issue. You know, it feels kind of weak to be a turn 2 play in Modern. So I'm not sure, you know, if it is going to see play. Again, maybe in some green, blue, red deck or something like that where you can ramp a bit. Sculptor of Winter might be good, but it's definitely not an answer to the snow dual lands. Like, you're not going to play some fun deck where Sculptor of Winter allows you to play a lot of dual lands and then untap them whenever you want. It's not going to work the way you think it does. And if that is the case, then your opponents will just, you know, save their removal for Sculptor of Winter. It has no evasion. It only has 2 toughness, so essentially anything is going to kill it. Another creature I have my eye on that would almost certainly would have to be played in a deck that has a majority snow lands is Ascendant Spirit. It's a cool card. I don't know if it's really Modern playable. Probably isn't, but I would like to give it a shot. You know, I kind of tried to compare it to Hex Drinker, but Hex Drinker can get hexproof, and that's kind of really relevant in Modern. Here, Ascendant Spirit has no true evasion from removal, so that's going to be interesting. But again, it's something that I'm considering in terms of the snow cards that were printed in Kaldheim. So what does that mean? What's the conclusion here on these lands? Well, I think it's pretty straightforward. They're cool, they're awesome, but there isn't enough yet in Modern to justify playing these in any significant number that would you know, make sense. If you require them because you require more snow permanents, you're probably slowing your deck down enough to not make it competitive enough. Now, if you don't want to be competitive and you don't plan on playing in MTGO leagues or being competitive in paper when that comes back, then you could probably build a really, really fun snow deck. And for those of you that saw my red-green ho-ho-ho deck from Christmas 2020, you better believe my Christmas deck for 2021 is going to be gorgeous. I just got a whole bunch of toys that I can play with for that Christmas deck, you know, in 11 months. But yeah, that being said, not yet in Modern. I don't think so. I just don't see them. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Maybe I missed something. Maybe there's other snow cards that I should consider playing, but I just don't think they're going to make it. Not yet. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit notification bell, follow me on Twitter or Facebook, whichever you prefer. Ideally both, to help out with all the algorithms and finding my channel and finding my content. If you're interested in supporting this channel a bit further and you want to become a patron and join the ever-growing Patreon community, check out the link in the description of this video. Check out the tiers. I think they're pretty cool. There's a whole rewards program where I essentially send you back some of your money in the form of rares and mythics at the end of every year, and the longer you're a patron, the more you get. So just check that out. That's all in the tiers. Thanks, and have a good one.